Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's July 29th, 2022, and recently I posted another video about hugelkultur pits and forest management. And my theory is that by putting all of this woody material into large pits and then covering them up by soil, that can help conserve moisture, water in the soil, feed the forest area, because all of that woody material that would fall on the forest floor is food resources for microorganisms, including fungi, which underneath the forest floor, the largest organism here is our fungal organisms. And when we think of mushrooms and all, we often think of those ones we pick up at the store, the little mushrooms. That's the fruit. And the best way to think of it is, well, it's like the apple on the tree. And we wouldn't call the apple tree. There's all that tree that we see above the ground with all the photosynthetic leaves, all of the trunk, all of the main stems and branches. And then there's this massive root system underneath the ground. Well, besides the massive root system underneath the ground of all of these trees, there's an internet of things. There's the network of fungal organisms that exchange nutrients between the various plants on the floor of the forest. So it is a huge network. They're all interconnected by mycelium. And mycelium is sort of the way of thinking about everything about the fungus that isn't the mushroom that you pick up in the store. So by digging these hugelkultur pits, we're creating a nutrient reserve, and by taking litter off the ground of the forest floor that is already inoculated with the mycelium, that's like the roots of the fungus, and we're incorporating that into the hugelkultur pits, the woody material and branches, root balls, all that material under the ground. And the reason I'm pointing over here is because there's a whole bunch of hugelkultur pits that I've been putting in right around in here. So by creating these nutrient reserve areas, it's like the refrigerator or the root cellar to feed the population in the forest, and inoculating it with the appropriate microorganisms, that's going to gradually break down. And so as it breaks down, one of the questions I got was, what about the forest floor? Isn't that going to, the areas over these hugelkultur pits, aren't these going to settle and all? And yes, they do settle. If you look at our videos on the third food forest, that area where we harvest the garlic and all that, every bit of that area up there has multiple hugelkultur pits around up in there. So there has been settling, and that was put in 2009 or 2010. And there's, for the first 3 years, there's some settling. But I think there's a system that can help to speed up the breakdown. So last year or the year before, I did a deconstruction of a large hugelkultur mounds and pits, and looking at the logs and how quickly they break down. And I'd say that most of the logs, and let's say a trunk like this, can break down in 8 years. The root ball, because it has so much soil wrapped around the roots itself, may take longer to break down. But if you were to take just root balls, in other words, just the part that, let's say you cut off the top of the tree and you burnt all of the limbs in a brush pile, and then you decided to take the parts that weren't easily burnt, all of the big root balls, then you would have big depressions in the areas where you buried those. And it might take as many as 10 or 20 years for that to actually happen, because of the amount of soil that's there and the rate at which that would actually break down. The other reason that it would create more of a depression is you're taking these large, not round necessarily, but very large. It's like if you're to take a dump truck and you were to fill it up with large boulders, the volume of earth that would fit into that dump truck would be less than if you filled it up with sand, because the sand would fill all of the small voids, where big root balls will have big air spaces around it, and then over time as they break down there would be large like craters put into the ground. But by mixing the materials, mixing the root balls and jamming the limbs and all those materials around it, the decomposition doesn't necessarily allow for these great big craters and all. But when I do these Hugelkultur pits, I'll go ahead and track over it, yes, like you could see in that last video, but I'll also come like every year for like 3 years, I'll come in and fill in any voids. Just take the tractor, fill in any small spots. So how am I getting the soil? Am I going to hire, purchase truckloads of soil? No. Let's show you. Over the last few years, I've been making trails down in here. And now I'm doing the major cleanup. Well, I got to talk about the brush in a moment. But let's go up over here. So, as I mentioned, this area back 20 years ago, there was lots of partying going on around here. It was a big dump site for trash and all, then lots of partying happened here. And what I've been doing is taking the equipment, and I use Bumblebee, the old mini excavator, and I would push up large piles. And as you could see before, if you saw in some of the videos, I'd come up here and take the soil from here. How did I get the soil? Because I take up all the debris, and it's got rocks in it, and it starts to look like this here. Lots of roots and materials in here, and this tomorrow in the spring, this will shoot up with weeds coming out of it. This fall it'll actually happen, but next spring it'll even be more. Then I come over here with the excavator and I turn it over again. Now it isn't always as bony as this because I'll pull out some of the rocks, and the next year the material will look like this. And so all of this, as it gets finer, I don't mind putting this bulkier stuff with the stones in on top of the root balls and the brush and all of those materials, because all of this, the smaller material, will filter down in between. And again, this was all material from the forest floor, so it has lots of microorganisms in it. This is very much alive, and this can feed on that material. We'll go over there in a second and all. But if over time I want to fill in the voids and all, this is the material I can use to fill in, because this is broken down over a 2-year period. And so this is where I had it piled up. Yesterday I came in and just dragged it over here and piled it up right here. So there are ways of working the area and filling in the voids. And we do have to anticipate there's going to be voids as this material breaks down. Now I'm getting this ready to go into the next Hugelkultur pit. So this is a mixture of branches and material and all. Carpenter ants were in these logs here. So, but another really good comment that I got on one of the videos is taking a lot of the brush and putting around some of the trees that you wanna keep in the forest. So let's say you've got a pawpaw tree or whatever, or pawpaw isn't the best example, some maple or chestnut trees, trees that the deer might browse on, and fruit trees, apple trees and all. You could take some of the brush and pile it around the tree, as long as you're not volcano mulching. In other words, putting material that holds moisture up against the trunk of the tree. But by putting brush around a tree in your forested areas, it helps to reduce the amount of browse. The deer, if they like it enough, they'll climb right up on the brush. That's been my experience. But that's one more way of utilizing the brush on the forest floor. If you're in a fire zone, though, in an area, out west with all the big fires going on, then I probably would try to get all of that brushy material buried and use some other system for protecting the trees. So the short answer is yes, there will be sinkholes or depressions where these hugelkultur pits are, but the way that you pack the system by using a combination, not putting a whole bunch of big root balls in a hole, because that's going to settle over time and create a big sinkhole potentially. But by taking a couple of big root balls and lots of small branches, and remember, all those smaller branches are going to break down pretty rapidly, especially if there's inoculated soil from the forest floor, which has the microorganisms from all the leaf litter that's fallen to the floor that the fungi are breaking down, and then the bacteria, the microarthropods, all of those guys are working their way, the protozoa and all. And by taking that material and putting it into the pit is very helpful. And if you search my channel for soil succession, well, I talk about going from a bacterially dominated area like your lawn, going to a fungally dominated, and all the different microorganisms that are involved. And by using not a bacterially dominated mixture, getting inoculated into these large hugelkultur pits, using a fungally dominated mixture, then you have that combination of fungi, fungal consuming microarthropods and ciliated microorganisms, and certainly the bacteria as well. So we get a combination of organisms that can utilize that material, exchange, let the fungal network go out and interact with the roots of the various trees in the forest and the bushes that you're planting in the forest. And there can be a dynamic exchange of nutrients between that pit that you created via the microorganisms and the fungi working with the plants in the forest. I hope this all makes sense. There is some science to this whole process, but the short answer is yes, there are going to be depressions, but by using the material like we talked about in the forest, the piles, creating piles, we can decrease the chances of those igniting by pushing the material up and turning it over. That isn't going to catch fire, but it also is creating nutrient-rich soil to feed the trees that you're planting on top of the hugelkultur pits. So let me know if this is helpful at all, going over all this stuff. I really do appreciate your comments and questions. I think they're very, very valuable. And I'd really like to see more people creating hugelkultur pits, less burn piles and all. And we might be able to manage forest fires, reduce the number of forest fires by adopting some of these techniques. And it needs to be modified for each location as well. Thanks so much for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you found this of value, and by all means, stay safe and take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye now.